Chapter 3: The Importance of Empirical Evidence and Background Research, Spirit Science. Quote, "The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." End quote. By Nikola Tesla. The last chapter examined various basic concepts in quantum physics. This explains how the universe works at an infinitesimally smaller observation than the one we readily see with our basic senses. It was found that it is of utmost importance to be able to examine background research and empirical evidence in order to examine real-life scientific data, so we can come to integrated conclusions about life. This is so that we can carefully examine how our immediate universe affects each one of us. With this foundation, it is going to be plainly stated that the studies of what has been known as true religion or spirituality are essentially the same to what quantum mechanics has taught us about the nature of the universe and our innate abilities as human beings. The biblical reference will be examined carefully, proving that the spiritual principles described within have basis in quantum physics. This is not to say that other spiritual references such as the Jewish Talmud, Babylonian cuneiforms, Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Vedas, and Western philosophies, among others, are not being considered. But what is being observed and considered, in essence, are common denominators of spiritual beliefs as they are found throughout these references. Many specific spiritual beliefs find parallels throughout all the known holy books. It is also acknowledged here that there are contradictions, whether subtle or obvious, within many of these sources. This is also stated in the spirit of knowing that it is all we know so far based on the latest discoveries in the field of archaeology. It is also acknowledged that many principles described as spiritual beliefs or laws were only relevant to understandings in those societies and are not relevant in our day or the future, although some of these spiritual beliefs may be relevant to our times. It is emphasized that, in light of quantum mechanics and the scientific lenses of established empirical evidence, these common denominators found in spiritual references, mainly the Bible, will be shown in this book to have timeless benefit in our everyday life, regardless of background, race, religion, beliefs, present understanding, and time. It is also strongly emphasized that we will examine philosophical teachings from experts through both the lenses of scientific and spiritual knowledge. Experts or people known to have created incredible success, whether in their personal lives or by influencing the world and creating tangible positive changes in it. It is the desire of the author of this book to establish an unbiased and objective report of our personal power and ability in connection to our present reality. To what purpose? To help the reader establish a progressive understanding and realization that, in fact, quote, "if the genius of invention were to reveal tomorrow the secret of immortality, of eternal beauty and youth, for which all humanity is aching, the same inexorable agents which prevent a mass from changing suddenly, its velocity will likewise resist the force of the new knowledge until time gradually modifies human thought. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." End quote, by Nikola Tesla. Quote, "For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard grain, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and you will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." End quote, by Jesus Christ, Matthew 17, verse 20. Quote, "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, he can achieve." End quote, by Napoleon Hill. All three quotes are placed here to give you the perspective and frame of mind that regardless of the lenses you wish to see from, and that regardless of the point of observation that you pick, We are in actuality just observing the same rules under the same universe. With that in mind, let's consider what principles have been described in the Bible that emphasize the previous basic understandings of quantum mechanics. What the field of spirit science has revealed. In the previous chapter, we established that science has paved the way for powerful discoveries and creations that have an immediate positive effect in our immediate lives. We realize that just because we can describe how the various technological devices work to their essential detail does not mean that we should reject their existence. Therefore, it would also make sense to not entirely reject, but just consider the probability that the many of the outlandish observations in many of these spiritual books might have a basis in reality. What has been observed in these books may not be explained in detail by the people who witnessed and recorded such events, for as they experienced them in their personal lives, their perceptive abilities and points of reference were certainly limited. As a result, just like us who do not know the intricacies of how smartphones work, when we attempt to describe smartphones, wouldn't we just be describing miracles as well? Certainly, if we brought someone from the past, say the early 1900s, to our time, this person would have no choice but to accept the present realities as factual. In the beginning, they may be confused about our current technologies, such as our cell phones or other devices, but at some point they will just accept them for what they are in the same way we know them. The opposite, though, has a strange dichotomy. Let's say we are able to take any of these various devices, maybe a cell phone, and have it still access our current technological resources when we go to the past. Let's say we decide to go somewhere around the 1700s. The people of that time may readily condemn us and label us as the devil, sorcerers, evil beings, liars, the Antichrist, etc. Consider the same scenario with a different possible outcome. Let's say that we have incredible power and are able to influence a takeover of the few who are in power in that time and space. We then manage to establish a system of control. Once successful, we will be hailed as gods or angels from heaven who came here to bring salvation. As events unfold, the outcome can either prove disastrous or incredibly beneficial for that society. It could also be that they are just not ready for such revelations or miracles, regardless of our desire to improve their lives. By now, the idea should be firmly established in the reader's mind that it is all about different frames of mind, with different ways of looking at the same thing. A trial of knowledge, science, spirituality, and philosophy. With all these ideas in mind, let's examine spirituality considering quantum theory and philosophy. Spiritual principle 1. Everything is light, energy, frequency, and vibration. Quote, the God said, let there be light. Then there was light. Interestingly enough, the creation account talks about a time when one of the first things to come about and be discerned in the universe was light. As we examined previously, light is nothing more than particles or waves in a paradoxical duality. Since everything is energy, frequency, and vibration, then we know for a fact that we can truly state that everything in the visible universe is light, or more precisely, different forms of photons of light. Quote, I form light and create darkness, taken from Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. Also considers this next passage. Quote, for God is the one who said, let the light shine out of the darkness. End quote. Taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. These texts and how they relate to light and darkness is an interesting parallel. Physicists are considering that darkness is just another form of energy. They are considering concepts such as antimatter, dark matter, and dark energy. It has been established that these different forms of energy essentially make up the majority of the known universe, and that from these unobservable energies, came what has been described as the visible spectrum of light. Although scientists admit that more is unknown than known about dark energy and dark matter, they do explain that roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy and dark matter makes up about 27%. In addition, everything that is measurable or observable, including galaxies, stars, planets, and the entire light spectrum, precisely make up less than 5% of the universe. What is powerful about this is that Albert Einstein explained that empty space is not nothing, that essentially has energetic properties, or that it contains its own energy. There's little to no evidence of the composition of dark matter or dark energy, but the observable phenomena suggest an interesting parallel between the following statement and these Bible texts. He stretches out the northern sky over empty space, suspending the earth upon nothing. End quote. Taken from Job 26, verse 7. Quote, you stretch out the heavens like a tenth cloth. End quote. Taken from Psalms 104, verse 2. There is one who dwells above the circle of the earth. He is stretching out the heaven like a fine gauze, and he spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. End quote. Taken from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. These descriptions of the heavens, or the observable universe as we know it today, are way ahead of their time. In a time where most people observe and readily accepted the earth as flat, here in Isaiah it is being described as a circle or sphere suspended upon nothing. It is estimated that the book of Psalms was finished or completed in 460 BCE, and that the book of Isaiah was completed in 732 BCE. That is staggering and mind-blowing. But let's strongly consider what is being said about the heavens and that Jehovah God stretches them out like a tent. In astrophysics, it has been described and it is accepted as scientific fact that the universe is expanding, that everything is moving across space. They are also observing that its expansion is accelerating. Consider that scientists still don't know what dark matter is or where it comes from, and that they only know that it is a property of space. Let's examine what the verse have described so far. Genesis chapter 1 verse 4 describes this strange phenomena. Quote, after that God saw that the light was good, and God began to divide light from darkness. End quote. This may suggest that dark matter existed before visible light, which is highly probable, considering that dark energy and dark matter make up most of the universe. Like a tree that is composed of mostly wood and leaves, and after some time it bears fruit or flowers. In this instance, light was its fruitage. Let's also consider that it was mentioned in Isaiah that Jehovah creates darkness. Compare that to what Albert Einstein discovered. Quote, it is possible for more space to come into existence. End quote. Taken from an article of NASA, Dark Energy and Dark Matter. The idea that dark matter can come from nothing is referred to as the cosmological constant. In dark energy, dark matter, NASA says this about the cosmological constant. Quote, empty space can possess its own energy. Because this energy is a property of space itself, it would not be diluted as space expands. As more space comes into existence, more of this energy of space would appear. As a result, this form of energy will cause the universe to expand faster and faster. Unfortunately, no one understands why the cosmological constant should even be there, much less why it will have exactly the right value to cause the observed acceleration of the universe. In my opinion, there are strong parallels between quantum theory and the study of the cosmos and the observations written thousands of years ago by seemingly uneducated mystics. Where did they receive this information? Did they meet aliens from outer space? Not necessarily, but let's think that it might have something to do with the concept that our brain not only transmits, but also receives energy, frequency, or vibration. Let's consider it as something to ponder. Let's go back to the idea being developed within the scientific community that the universe is expanding from nothing and that dark matter or energy seems to come from nowhere. Notice that this other passage in the Bible also says, referring to the natural order of things, quote, "By faith we perceive that the system of things were put in order by God's word, so that what is seen has come into existence from things that are not visible." End quote. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3. I feel the two ideas described are strong parallels. Scientists are emphasizing that matter is created from nothing, as it has been observed. The text in the Bible similarly is saying that everything we perceive with our senses has come from things unseen. Matter is light. Darkness separated in creation from light is referred to as dark matter in the scientific community. It is known to be both empty space and not nothing in both references. In one, it is referred to as light shining out of darkness. In the other, it is described as its own form of energy, separate from light, but allowing visible light to exist. Both references describe that the physical universe is expanding. Spirituality and science, lenses of perception looking at the same thing. All this evidence establishes a strong point. The Bible was way ahead of its time. It is almost like what is being described through advanced technological devices had to be simplified to its most basic description for those who are considered babies in the timeline of the progressive evolution of knowledge. A book from the future? Perhaps. A book written from a much higher point of view for the benefit of those from a much lower point of view? The reader can decide. Please note that it is only suggested to consider these points of view. Maybe you, as the reader of this book, has previously established in your own mind and take the Bible as an authority in information and practical knowledge. Either way, even if you don't consider it as an authority and is not convinced as of yet, know that it is not the point here to force a change in your mind. It is here to help you consider a different point of view, where you are encouraged to take as your own mission to come to your own conclusions. It could mean your own personal success in life, whatever may that be. This book will only establish a few points to imprint a desire on the reader to come to personal cognitions of reasoning. It is about developing your own personal discoveries out of your own free will. Obviously, the experiments that prove what we discussed in chapter 2 could not have been done or replicated in biblical times, at least not on our own. For emphasis, it teaches us that photons are only particles existing in what has already been established and known as particle-wave duality. The question then arises, can many of the so-called miracles in the Bible be explained through quantum physics as empirical evidence of what we know today? Again, the conclusion is up to the reader to decide. Scientific concepts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the previous chapter cannot be compared in the spiritual references since they could not be replicated by those who wrote the biblical reference. Thus, these scientific concepts known as the double-slit experiment, everything in the universe exists in a paradoxical duality, quantum entanglement, the uncertainty principle, and quantum tunneling, our brain, a transmitter and receiver of energy, frequency, and vibration, and finally string theory and the law of magnetic attraction will not be discussed as we did now scientific concept 1. We will reestablish instead the principles described in connection to the universe at the end of chapter 2. At this point, we want to imprint some points of reference for posterity. This will help the reader save patience as he reads. You will notice that as you continue to read, we will refer to the following references and its definitions. This will simplify the way this book is read and understood. So as we go on, we will refer to the following 3 quotes and points of reference as the triad of knowledge. We will also refer to the 6 scientific concepts as they were simplified in the form of 4 principles of quantum physics. This is to help us understand the principles of science and how they relate to what is being observed in the Bible. So when we see these references, we should consider referring back to them so that we know exactly what are the points being established. They are the following: the triad of knowledge. Quote, if the genius of invention were to reveal tomorrow the secret of immortality, of eternal beauty and youth, for which all humanity is aching, the same inexorable agents which prevent a mass from changing suddenly, its velocity will likewise resist the force of the new knowledge until time gradually modifies human thought. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. End quote, by Nikola Tesla. Quote, for truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard grain, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. End quote, by Jesus Christ, Matthew 17, verse 20. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. End quote, by Napoleon Hill. To emphasize, the non-visible universal particles are described and governed by the following principles. Principle 1. Everything is energy, frequency, or vibration. Everything in the known universe is a collection of energy vibrating at different frequencies, and each thing is collectively and individually putting out its own unique and distinct frequency. This is also true at every level of possible and known observation, from the macrocosmic observation to the microcosmic observation of the universe. Principle 2. Everything in the universe exists in a state of duality, also known as the particle-wave duality. It is one of the basics of quantum physics. Energy exists as both particles with particle-like qualities, defined in time and space, as well as wave-like frequencies with wave-like properties, not defined in time and space. Thus, the conclusion is also that we, as people and human beings, also live in a state of vibrational duality. It is also explained that it is the observer that collapses the wave function of the particle, thus establishing it precisely in what seems to be a specific place in time and space. All this was explained by the double-slit experiment, quantum entanglement, the uncertainty principle, and quantum tunneling. Refer to Chapter 2 for explanations of these concepts. Principle 3. Since we also live in a state of particle-wave duality, our brain also exists in a state of particle-wave duality. Then it is conclusive that our brain transmits and receives energy, frequency, and vibration at our command. Our transmission of energy is also picked up by other brains. Also, our brain's transmission of frequency affects physical matter. Simply put, we can create a transmission from what already exists, and we create a frequency based on what has not come into existence. The previous statements will continue to be developed throughout. Principle 4. Everything in the universe is governed by magnetic forces of attraction. Just like the law of gravity says, what goes up must come down, as it is always a constant. Also, the law of magnetic attraction says that frequencies or vibrations that are alike or communicate attract and pull each other. Similar or same energy is attracted to itself. This is what string theory is based upon. Let's now also consider and observe how these scientific concepts and quotes from experts and their different points of reference relate to what the biblical account has described as miracles or strange phenomena. This examination in the light of quantum mechanics can help us discern that these events are not as far-fetched as some will have us believe. Scientific potentiality number 1. Water is wine. Most people are aware of the time Jesus performed his first miracle. At a wedding reception, the people had run out of wine, and Jesus decided to be the party saver by turning water into wine. This may sound as ludicrous as the lesson we learn about the particles of energy and what they are able to do at a quantum level, such as being in more than one place at the same time. Since this is true, is it probable that the water particles of Jesus' story were also in a state of particle-wave duality? Of course. So can we ask, when those particles of water were not being observed, in essence, those particles were connected to an infinite amount of places in time and space? We cannot deny what scientists have proven, so we have to say yes. We can conclude then that these particles were connected to one particles in some place other than where the water was in an instant in time. If that is the case, then those particles were already potentially wine particles, as described by Principle 2. How? Principles 1 and 2 explain that everything vibrates and is permeating all time and space. Therefore, the water is connected to an infinite amount of possibilities in time and space. This is true because the experiment proved that all particles are really anywhere, everywhere, and nowhere. It also proved that they are just relevant in space and in time based on the influence of the observer. That is why the wave function of particles collapses into a specific place in time and space based on the decision of the observer. On a side note, we want to keep going back to the principles as they are being referred to. Please read and reread them. Could Jesus then, in command of his reality, have chosen to observe wine as opposed to water out of his own volition? Principle 3 explains this to be a certain probability in reality. Since reality is at our command, in this instance, Jesus' brain could have transmitted a frequency or vibration to affect the particles of matter found in the water. Maybe like a computer programmer writes code, Jesus rewrote the code of the composition of the water. Or maybe he exchanged or replicated the particles of the wine already existing somewhere else in the instant in time. Teleportation is being discussed as a future probability within the scientific community, if it is not an already hidden technological fact. Genius, famous inventor, and scientist Nikola Tesla was quoted saying that one day we will be teleported across space and time in an instant. He believed in anti-gravity airships, teleportation, and even time travel as a result of becoming aware of the particle-wave duality concept. Nikola Tesla was probably the most powerful scientist of his time. How did Jesus perform this miracle? We don't know as of yet, but it seems that it is a probability in the realm of quantum mechanics through the power of our mind. But what we may yet to consider is that the real and best piece of technology is the human genome. Scientific potentiality 2. 2 fishes and 5 loaves feed over 5,000. Let's consider another quantum miracle by Jesus. We all may know, or at least heard of, the few times where he was able to feed a crowd of possibly more than 5,000 with only a couple of fishes and a few pieces of bread. Could he have taken the particle structure of each fish and piece of bread and just multiplied it through his power of observation? Please refer to Principle 2 and 3. So maybe Jesus just chose to observe the particles in the fish and bread and decided to multiply them as needed. The trial of knowledge affirms the probability of Jesus choosing to match the frequency of the field of energy in space to his intention and desire to feed the crowd of thousands. In this instance, the fish and the bread particles are an infinite probability. It really denotes the idea that the particles in the few fishes and bread as a wave function are irrelevant to amount or quantity. 1 fish is the same as 1 million. 2 loaves of bread are the same as 2 million loaves of bread. We can illustrate the concept of infinity by the way we use our smartphone or computer to use the internet. We could open one web page, but just because you open that web page and it is in your immediate experience, it does not mean that someone else cannot open the same page. It also does not mean that you cannot open the same page a second time within the same window. Multiple pages within the same window are called tabs. You could virtually open an infinite amount of tabs in the same window or open an infinite amount of pages on the same computer screen. And thus, every person with a computer and internet connection has the potential for an infinite amount of information. Can we say that Jesus was able to do the same with the fish and bread and the water? According to the laws of quantum particle physics, this is a probability or reality and most likely possible in real life, according to the implications of time and space as defined by the particle wave duality. How did he do it? Or what specific techniques did he use? We will discuss this in a later chapter. The trial of knowledge certainly gives us clues as to what we can personally use to change our immediate reality. Scientific potentiality number 3. Christ's consciousness can use brain transmission to change the channel on illness and disease. When you read the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we find Jesus and his apostles performing powerful quantum miracles. We refer to them as quantum miracles because they are powerful changes that take place at a quantum level based on laws of physics. Consider that they affected the particle composition of people by changing it to what they commanded with their speech to happen. There's one account in the scripture found in Matthew chapter 9 where Jesus is observed by a crowd of people commanding or using his words to make something that seemed impossible. While teaching a crowd, he was interrupted by some men bringing their friend on a stretcher. This friend was paralyzed from top to bottom. They wanted a cure. Jesus then used the words in the form of a command or a transmission of frequency from his brain amplified by his vocal cords. He said, quote, "Get up, pick up your stretcher, and go home," end quote. Plain and simple, he was telling the ill man to do something that was impossible for him to do, for he was paralyzed. But the crowd observed exactly what Jesus commanded. The man got up, picked up his stretcher, and went home. It was not a polite request, nor was it in the form of a question. So like an owner telling his dog to fetch, sit, lie down, the paralyzed man had no choice but to do as Jesus said. Well, how? We can consider the possibility of Jesus' command in the form of vibration affected the man's particles and added the particles needed to allow him to be a person who could walk and pick up things. Or maybe in the paralytic state of particle wave duality, his energetic structure in waveform was also available as a completely healthy man. Thus, through the law, a powerful magnetic force, the particles had to produce that which was called forth to happen. To illustrate, we can think of our TV remote and how it affects our TV at our command. The screen projects particles defined or not defined on the screen. We see it as static in some channels or as TV programs broadcasted that are picked up in the form of frequencies. All the channels may be static, but we can command them to be defined as TV programs with our remote. The frequencies of the channels are being constantly picked up by the receiver on your TV. They are always there, and all you have to do is choose to observe what we desire to watch by collapsing the wave function on the screen. We just press the button and we change the channel to our preference based on our transmitter, the remote controller. In this instance, Jesus, through his remote controller, his projected transmission commanded by his brain, affected the particles in duality of the paralyzed man. In essence, the TV station was changed to the health channel. Interestingly, the story is concluded like this. Quote, "When the crowd saw this, they were struck with fear, and they glorified God who gave such authority to men." End quote. Taken from Matthew chapter 9, verse 8. The text emphasized that such authority was given to men. This is remarkable and needs to be strongly considered as a basic truth of life based on the triad of knowledge and the scientific principles here being described. We do indeed have the potential to replicate what Jesus or other biblical characters did to perform outstanding feats with their own power. We realize that this statement may sound like science fiction, but we need to consider that just maybe we are reading about experiences of a person using powerful technologies at his disposal. Accepting future realities by traveling to the past. Reading these references in what has been considered as a spiritual book can help us realize that, in fact, we are just observing really advanced technology. We are seeing people who seem to have come from the future, for as we observe these quantum miracles, we have traveled to the future, in essence, to experience what seems to be normal for others. For as we read these eyewitness accounts, we may be peering into what will be available to us in the near future. So then, are we not forced to acknowledge these events as realities, regardless of our understanding, since we see them? Yes, the biblical account was written in the past, but in reality, those people were only observing advanced technology based on empirical evidence. They had no choice but to report what they saw. So when we read these accounts, like the time traveler from the past, should we not readily accept them as probabilities of present realities in the light of scientific evidence? The choice to accept these as truths is really for the reader to decide, and it is your obligation to come up with your own conclusions. No one has a monopoly on knowledge and information. We wish to emphasize that these are just thoughts to consider as probabilities. But now, let's think about what has been considered even more magical stories of technologies of unfathomable imagination. Going back to Moses, we may now realize or at least consider that they are no longer just myths based on unrealities. Consider the 10 plagues, turning the Nile into blood, the control of pests to torment the Egyptians like commanding trained dogs to attack criminals, 3 days of darkness upon the Egyptians but not the Israelites at the same time in the same land, the seemingly easy victory of slaves in poor condition defeating more powerful nations, the splitting of the Red Sea, food falling from heaven to feed a camp of millions of men, women, and children. Other accounts, such as the prophet Elijah, are good things to consider. He was able to outrun horses, escaping certain execution. He made a widow's remaining oil and flour last an entire drought. It is said that he was picked up by a fiery chariot with fiery horses and was taken into the sky. Maybe this was describing a spaceship of some sort, and there was no other way to describe what his companion Elisha was seeing, since there was no reference points for his experience. But maybe it was truly a flying chariot with fire-breathing horses, thus we may consider them all to be true through the ramifications of the light spectrum and the principles of science described in this book. These principles all give way to high probabilities for these things to take place in our reality. There are many more so-called myths found not only throughout the Bible, but also through many other sources. These and others will not be described, since only these few describe to prove the point that nothing is impossible. Through the lenses of quantum mechanics, we are certainly helped to consider these eyewitness accounts more strongly, for the many implications that allow for these things to take place, unfortunately, were done by seemingly uneducated people and civilizations. They are simple and inadequate descriptions as allowed by their limited comprehension. Spiritual Principle 2. The Law of Magnetic Attraction. We want to digress just a little and firmly establish in our minds the ramifications and implications of Spiritual Principle 2. It is an examination of the application of the laws of magnetic attraction as it relates to string theory in connection with spirituality. It has become, or it has always been, common knowledge among the populace that this law exists. The awareness is obviously at an all-time high nowadays, unlike previous centuries. But the Bible does describe the law of attraction and string theory through illustrations and some other parallels. Let's consider the most basic known principle found in the Bible. Quote, "For whatever a person is sowing, this he will also reap." End quote. Taken from Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. This has also been described as a form of karma in Eastern philosophy. We constantly hear that what goes around comes around, or that whatever we give comes back to us manifold. Some call it causality, the principle that everything has a cause, that for everything there's also an equal and opposite reaction. This is Newton's third law of motion. Many people, although not aware of it, may accept this reality at least at a near subconscious level. We are aware that positive or negative actions and decisions have either negative or positive consequences. Your powerful thoughts. In The Iron Lady, which is strongly recommended movie to watch, Meryl Streep, who plays Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of England, says, quote, "Watch your thoughts for they become your words. Watch your words for they become your actions. Watch your actions for they become your habits. Watch your habits for they become your character, and watch your character for it becomes your destiny. What we think, we become." Earl Nightingale, creator of one of the oldest spoken word records on personal development called The Strangest Secret, describes the same idea by saying that, quote, "we become what we think about most of the time," end quote. Interestingly, Earl Nightingale developed his career through his personal study of the New Testament and Napoleon Hill's works, mainly Think and Grow Rich. But now let's consider some more thoughts from the scriptures. Quote, "For it is wind that they are sowing, and they will reap a storm wind," end quote, taken from Hosea chapter 8, verse 7. Quote, "Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully," end quote, taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. There are great illustrations that help us appreciate this powerful known universal principle or law. We readily see its effects on every conceivable aspect of our lives. As the Iron Lady pointed out, our thoughts, our words, our actions, our habits, our character, our destiny, each thought is a vibration of frequency in the form of wave. It permeates all time and space. It is all pervasive energies that affect every molecule that surrounds us. It defines us and drives us with powerful influence. It is a law. People in the past have tried to fly in their psychosis, jumping off buildings to their death, not realizing that their collective vibration has to obey regardless of their childish and persistent thoughts. They have paid dearly with their lives. We should consider that those forces permeate every thought that we formulate, from our words all the way to our destiny. In essence, who we are and our lives are nothing but a result of what we have thought about or what we have been influenced to think up to this point. We have created our own destiny. Destiny here is defined as the collective vibrational frequency of what we are and who we are. This idea will be developed further in another chapter. Therefore, as we continue to persist with our thoughts, whether of a positive nature or a negative nature, that is exactly what is being given to us through the natural response of the universe and its laws. At this point, many people wonder how could they have created so much misery or chaos in their lives themselves. We think that somehow we are just victims of people and circumstances beyond our control. This might be true to a certain extent, but it does not refute that these laws exist and affect every conceivable thought and action of mind and body. We must reap what we have sown. Whatever frequency we generate and broadcast must come back instantly to us. Consider what Jesus made very clear to those who were considered very unlettered and uneducated people. At the Sermon on the Mount, he explained that thoughts could have an evil nature or that they could be powerfully negative with strong negative consequences. Quote, "However, I say to you that everyone who continues wrathful with his brother will be accountable to the court of justice. And whoever addresses his brother with an unspeakable word of contempt will be accountable to the Supreme Court. liable to the fiery Gehenna. End quote. Taken from Matthew 5, verse 22. Let's strongly consider here the point regarding thoughts, mainly the ones of a negative nature. For the person who decides to harbor negative thinking will have to deal with serious consequences. Do the laws of physics give light to the possible outcomes of such negative thoughts? Considering that a hateful thought carries a frequency with a magnetic pull, then the strong emotion of hate is really amplifying the nature of that thought. The laws of physics permeating such thoughts will continue to make the intensity of the energy being broadcasted to its larger and more obvious manifestations. Those thoughts will become words of hate. Those words of hate will enforce the thoughts of themselves, creating bigger negative thoughts and more negative words. This will continue to influence the person's soul and the nature of that energy, vibrating powerfully, ultimately influence them to act negatively. This, in turn, will create powerful negative habits, which will create in us a person of negative character. Thus, our destiny or personal collective vibrational pattern will perpetuate every aspect of our lives and surroundings. To emphasize the truth about these statements, we previously discussed how in Japan there were some scientific experiments that were done with water proving that thoughts are things that affect physical matter. They prove in the same manner that we must realize that our body and mind, everything that makes us, are vibrating frequencies of energy into the universe, permeating all space and time, and thus, through the law of attraction, creating our lives and what we experience at every instant of plank time. It is the law. We must reap what we have sown, regardless of the nature of who we are, what we are, and who we have become. The great news is that the opposite is absolutely true by law. Our positive thoughts, as we enforce them, will create what we do desire. Our positive words will become positive actions that will translate into healthy habits of success. In turn, our character will be so powerful that we have no choice but to create our own desired destiny. Our automatic set point of vibration will bring us and create in our present reality the exact blueprint of that vibrational field. So if we want to feel good every day, to be in a career that we dream about, to do things we have thought of as impossible until now, we must know they are already in existence and that they are a reality in the energetic field of infinite possibilities. All we have to do is change the channel of our broadcast transmitter and receiver, our brain. Change what we picture, say, do, and most importantly, what we think and how we think. As we exercise this ability, we will program our molecular structure so that just like water will take the shape of any vessel that we pour into, we can essentially become what we want the most. Practical application. By now, we have firmly established that the laws of physics permeate our entire universe, including our set vibrational point. We may readily see what our vibration of energy is creating by making the diligent effort of observing our immediate reality. All the inputs and outputs of energy that we process are being translated into the various interactions with people, circumstances, and events that we experience. We must really start the process to examine carefully with our powers of discernment and awareness with this knowledge, what it is currently being mirrored back to us, as well as what has been given to us throughout our lives as a form of feedback due to our vibrational set point. This will also help us to discern what it is that will continue to be given to us as our future days continue to unfold. As we readily examine with full awareness what we experience, we may start to hate our present reality. But this is good because we can harness that powerful emotion and decide to observe something else. We could decide to become thankful with the prospect of creating something better. So whether it is better feelings about our everyday life, more opulence in our present reality, or a relationship that can enforce positive aspects in our life, we realize that we are now aware of the positive probabilities of creating and bringing whatever we want into our existence. But maybe we may wonder, can we really just have, be, and do whatsoever we desire? Consider this text from the scriptures that implies the nature of what our ability is supposed to be with certainty. Quote, "And God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." End quote. Taken from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. According to the biblical reference, God has unfathomable power. And since we are considered to be made in His image, then, in connection with Him, so do we ourselves have unfathomable power. Like mini gods made in His image, we can exercise our creative ability just like God did. For by exercising our abilities to speak things into existence, then it will become our nature to harness this power. It will also be proven that it is our moral obligation to create exactly what we want. Just like it is our moral obligation to be clean, or love our families, or save a helpless baby from drowning, so is also our moral obligation and right to pursue our dreams and goals, whatever they may be. As long as we do not step on other people's rights, desires, goals, and dreams, we can do anything. It will be proven that, like the physical laws of the universe that exist, so must our desires come into our present reality by law, and not just because we want to, but because it is our moral obligation to do so. For if we don't, the physical laws of the universe say we must die.